If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what has been your scariest hiking experience? I was going on an overnight hike in a small wooded valley that has lots of smaller connecting valleys coming off of it. I just crested one hill to find out a grass fire that I thought was small was huge and headed my way. I ended up having to run, and as I came to the edge it was about a 100-foot drop, so I was running parallel with the fire looking for a safe way to get down. I eventually got to a slope I could slide down and escape. Once I got to the bottom, I found out the tarp I was carrying under my pack was actually melted a bit on one side. I left and did not spend the night. When I was about 7, one of the kids in my neighborhood had told me that he knew his way around the woods and hiking trails by my house. I was a kid and had nothing better to do that day. So, I convinced my mom that we'd be fine. After all, my friend knew where we were going. I said we wouldn't go far, and we'd be back in an hour or two, and then off we went. Spoiler alert, he did not actually know where he was going. We realized we were lost after a couple hours, and the logical solution to 7-year-old us appeared to be to wander around and hope we got lucky and found the trailhead we came in through. We wandered for a few more hours, gradually losing hope as the sun began to set. I can remember being completely panicked and convinced I was never going to see my family again. Eventually, and fucking luckily, we came across a guy who had been out for a sunset hike, and he actually had a map and knew where he was going. He walked us back to the entrance by my house in the dark. I made it home safe to an angry mother who was about 5 seconds from calling the cops. I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early, or staying out late, to get as many miles in as possible. Sometimes, walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under our canopy of stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lake shore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of wilderness. My scariest experience though happened at about 0430 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 to 45 minutes, another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between 2 steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack. And I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 0430 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around, and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of here. To describe it as best I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. More a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack, and not a thud or thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from. And I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant, as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head's somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point. Trying to be quiet. Taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten, death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, or especially leafed branches, make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I don't know. On acid, found an old abandoned barn in the forest, with thick padlocks keeping its doors shut. While examining the lock on one of the doors, very closely because drugs, it seemed like something threw itself against the inside of the door. The lock bounced up and chips of paint fell off the door. Solid chance someone was just fucking with us, but very scary nonetheless. Another time, found an abandoned campsite. There was a sketchbook filled with the ramblings of someone who had taken too many hallucinogenic and decided to ditch society, and over 70 pages of gnarly vector calculus, most of which were beyond my scope of understanding as a BS physicist. The tent was on a platform hanging a few feet off the ground beneath a tree and had been torn to shreds, presumably by raccoons or something. Inside were somehow still damp pillows and a sleeping bag, which had become very moldy. To this day my friend and I refer to it as the Blair Witch campsite, and haven't been able to find it again. When I was 19 years old, I went on a camping trip to a small river island near my city, alone and planning on a weekend stay of 2 nights. The evening I arrived went well. I found a nice clearing following a small river nearby, set up a hammock and built a small perimeter with bells and wire so animals couldn't sneak up on me. I made a small fire and started setting up my gear to go fishing the next day. When I went to sleep, I made sure to have a clear line of sight to my stuff and to the direction I came from, so in case anyone showed up I didn't have to move to be aware of it. As I fell asleep, I heard the sounds of the forest growing more and more intense, and suddenly stopping altogether. A few moments of silence went by, and I heard a faint whistling sound in the distance. Now, we have a lot of folklore here. Most of it is related to spirits, ghosts and the forests. I've seen my fair share of creepy/strange stuff in the forest, but never came across any of the major characters of said folklore. This particular whistling sound reminded me of one of those characters, and I was trying to determine if it was an animal sound or just the wind. After listening for what seemed like an eternity, I figured it was coming closer with each whistle, from the same direction across the river. Then I started hearing the sounds of the forest again, the whistle blending in but also standing out when it came, like all the animals and insects were giving it its own space. Definitely spooked by now, and believing I identified the thing whistling, I announced something like, "Madanta, come tomorrow and I'll give you your tobacco. Please let me sleep tonight." And waited for the whistle to come again. It never did, and I went to sleep knowing I was in debt with the spirit. For clarification, Madanta is an old, emaciated woman with long gray hair that looks like it's barbed wire. She transforms into a bird to whistle and signal her presence in the forest. Anyone who hears her whistle has to either leave and don't come back, or give her an offering of either alcohol or tobacco to be left alone, a debt that will be paid the next day. People say you can either wait for her to come, or leave the offering in the same spot you slept that night for her to find. Now, back to the story, I left my offering of tobacco beneath my hammock and went to fish. I didn't want to wait around, since it's part of the legend that those who see her may be visited again every time they go through the forest. If you don't pay, she punishes you by flailing her hair at you when you sleep, scratching your limbs and back until you pay her, and I had already met someone who thought it was just a story and didn't pay. Sufficient to say his back was scarred, and I took his word for it. I spent around 4 hours upstream fishing, and came back around 10 a.m. The tobacco was gone, with no tracks around the hammock indicating someone walked in and grabbed it. Needless to say, I packed up and left, and never came back to that spot. To this day I cannot explain it, and people who experience this same particular occurrence always described it to me the same way. There's an old abandoned road behind my house that winds down the mountain beside the ski hills. It was abandoned because no one lived on it and it was costing the town too much money to maintain it, but it's a cool spot to go hiking now. One day I was hiking down towards the river at the bottom of the road. It was fall, so all the leaves were off and it was very bright in the woods. I came around a corner to a section of the road that was washed out, so I was focusing more on my footing than my surroundings, but something caught my eye. I look up and there's a cougar frozen in fear about 10 feet away from me. It was probably thinking the same thing I was. Holy fuck, now what do I do? So we just sit there staring at each other for a minute or two when suddenly a stick cracks behind me, which makes me jump, which scares the cougar. The thing scrambled to turn around and run just like a house cat and disappears into the trees. I turned around to see what made the noise, and it's a deer. A fucking deer scared off a cougar by just stepping on a stick. Granted, if I wasn't there to put the cougar on edge already, that deer would probably have been dead, and similarly, if that deer hadn't been there, the situation may not have ended as well for me, so we all survived based on sheer luck. Hiked about 4 miles up to the peak of a small mountain in Utah with my dog to watch the sunset. It was above tree line, but there was a lot of scrub oak with game trails through them. After the sun went down and I was headed back to the car, the little trail I was on entered a little corridor of scrub oak. Imagine a dense wall of undergrowth on either side of the trail. My dog was in front of me, and as she got close to the entrance of the scrub oak, she froze, got tense and growly, and wouldn't move forward. I took out the headlamp that I had in my pocket, but the batteries were almost dead and I couldn't see what she was so upset about. I walked in front and she followed. The path opened back up into a clearing, but as we approached the next patch of scrub oak, she did the same thing, although even more aggressively. I scanned the hill above the trail and could see animal eyes reflecting the light back at me maybe 150 yards away. I couldn't make out what it was and just assumed it was a deer, elk or moose, and kept my light on the eyes as they watched us enter the oak again. This happened again about 20 minutes later, and I again assumed it was a deer, although was concerned by the recurrence and my dog's escalating agitation. Then we made it into the tree line. I had been traveling by moonlight, only using the headlamp when the dog was acting aggressive. The woods were very dark and we had about 1.5 miles to the car. Very quickly the dog completely loses it, rabid barking, very scared, pissed. I turn on the light and see eyes again down to my right, maybe 30 yards off in the woods, and again can't tell what it is. I kick some rocks loose and yelling start lobbing rocks into the woods at the animal. No blinking, they don't move. At this point I accept that we are being stalked and know that I need to both keep up the "I'm aware of you and angry about it" act and not lose my shit and start running for the next 20 to 30 minutes back to the car. The trail switches back around the eyes and they watch us steadily as I continue to yell and throw rocks. Then they are behind us and then blink out. At this point I'm scared shitless. It's likely a mountain lion and my dog is probably the only reason it hasn't done anything yet. For the rest of the way to the car I played out scenarios of how the attack was going to go down. Nothing happened. We sprinted the last 100 yards. It felt like when you're a little kid and are coming up the basement stairs, scared that something is behind you and can't run fast enough. I was hiking down a trail in the dead of winter, along a stream. At one point the trail narrowed to about 4 feet wide, with a steep slope on one side and a sheer drop of 10 feet to the creek on the other side. The trail was coated in a sheet of ice. Being cautious, I got down on all fours to crawl across the patch of ice. Not good enough. I felt my body sliding slowly towards the edge. I felt suspended in midair before I fell. It reminded me of Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons, when he looks at the camera and holds up a sign saying help, before plunging to the bottom of the cliff. On the way down, I managed to get my feet pointing down. I landed hard in the creek, making a huge splash. My legs acted as shock absorbers. I clawed my way up the bank, back to the trail, and limped the miles back to my car. I felt lucky to get out of that with just a pulled hamstring. I'll never forget that moment suspended in midair, where I thought I'm about to get really, really hurt. I was probably 4 years old in the dead of winter at my super rural childhood home. My dog, a large German Shepherd, wandered off and I trusted him enough to follow him. My mom didn't see me leave the yard. I think she was cooking or something. Either way, following the dog wasn't the best idea. Once we got well out of sight, he stopped being in leader mode and went into protect mode. He just stuck with me and wouldn't take me out of the woods. I was too young to know to follow my footprints back or anything, and it was dangerously cold. I don't know how much time had passed, but my mom ended up calling emergency services. Cops and firefighters came out looking for me, and my dog almost mauled a cop that got too close to me. It wasn't scary at the time, but looking back, I could have easily died in those woods. I was doing some backcountry snowshoeing. I had some time off and thought the best thing to do was freeze my ass off miles from the nearest person. I got to base camp, which was basically just a parking lot with a notice board and emergency phone. Signs were posted: local frequency is 9999, emergency services may be unavailable, beware of avalanches, all the usual stuff. There were a few other cars at base camp. There was another dude setting off as I pulled in. But we went in different directions. A few miles in and I end up on a game trail through the woods. A light storm was blowing in. If I hadn't been in the woods I would have had to take shelter somewhere. But the trees broke it up, so I pushed on. The storm did make for some great photos. A little while later it starts to clear up. Then I see movement up ahead. Pretty quickly I can tell it's a man, heading my way. We stop to chat. It's pretty much standard practice if you see someone on the back country. It could be a lifesaver if you're able to give rescue crews a more recent position. And it breaks up the monotony of hearing nothing but your own footsteps. But immediately something is off about this guy. He's maybe 50, has high-end gear, in good shape. I couldn't make out much more since we were so bundled up. We say hello and he immediately starts asking questions. Who am I? Why am I out here? Where am I from? Who am I with? I try to be polite and answer, but he's off-putting, so I keep it vague. But he keeps pushing for details. I ask him the same questions and he deflected or gave vague, probably made up answers. He was sizing me up. I could practically see the gears turning behind his aviators. Our conversation ended abruptly when he reached for something on his belt, reached towards me, and took a step closer. I didn't react well. He freaked me out. I was on edge. I jumped back and stumbled. I almost tripped on my snowshoes. I unclasped my holster and had a hand on my gun. He paused, then said, "Well, I should get going. Stay safe." And he just took off. He marched away in the direction I had just come from. I stood there watching him for a minute, making sure he wasn't turning around and also just processing what happened. Then I started going again. I kept looking over my shoulder every couple of seconds for a few miles. Now at this point I feel the need to say that it's pretty normal for conversation to not really flow in the backcountry. It takes a certain type of person to enjoy that environment, and it's typically not the most socially competent folk. Sometimes they won't pick up on case and keep rambling on for an hour if you let them. Sometimes they're awkward or standoffish about seeing another person. Another thing about the backcountry is that just about everyone is armed. Sometimes animals get desperate, better safe than sorry. There's a lot of heavily armed, odd people in the backcountry. That said, this one guy is the only one that's made me feel unsafe. I love to hike solo. I do not do overnight or through hiking. But I, as a late 30s Som, will go out alone and hike all along the Cumberland Trail for a few hours while my kids are at school with my Bichon Frise. If you don't know what a Bichon is, it's a tiny frou-frou fluffy dog. Not a guard dog, lol. I live near a ton of hiking trails, so I can drop the kids off, drive to a trailhead, hike for 2 to 4 hours and then go pick my kids up. So anyway, solo hiking is kinda a peaceful and thrilling experience at the same time for me. There is an element of danger because I am all alone out there in the wilderness with no protection. If a person or animal attacks me, I am on my own. If I get lost, I am on my own. If I fall and get hurt, I am on my own. I always hike with a backpack that has a knife and pepper spray and iodine tablets and a snake bite kit and a first aid kit, etc. with me. Just in case. I do not, however, carry a firearm or a satellite phone. I may or may not have service in the woods. It depends. So while nothing crazy has ever happened, there is this one trail I have hiked alone a few times that has given me a very uneasy feeling at one point. You are pretty deep up into the woods at this point on a mountain. You go up this big face by climbing up rock steps. At the top there is a little path through some heavy greenery. At this part I always get a very uneasy feeling. So badly, I always get out my knife and my dog starts to act way more alert and tense. I never see or hear anything, but I notice that I never hear animals like squirrels or birds or bugs at this part either. The feeling of dread will continue till I am out of that part and climbing back down the rocks on the other side. Then my dog relaxes and I do too. The weird part is my friend also hiked that same trail and I described this part to her and she knew exactly what I was talking about and said she felt the same way at that same spot. If I had to guess, a predator must lurk/live there. Maybe a mountain lion, eastern Tennessee, or a bear or a bobcat or something. My dog would smell it, but I would not. However, I think all mammals have that danger sensor in their brain and whatever set it off at that spot. There is another trail where the same thing happens, where during one area you hear it get very quiet and get a sense of dread, and then it passes once you get past a certain point. Again, maybe same thing, that maybe a predator's home is nearby. It's a very unsettling feeling though. And I don't feel it the entire time I am alone in the woods. Just in certain spots and then it passes. We were camped right at the side of the river, just a few feet from the bank. I am a light sleeper, and woke up around midnight to the feeling like I was sleeping on a water bed. I poked my head outside the tent and sure enough, the water had risen quickly while we slept, and was beginning to fill our tents. I yelled out to the rest of my group to wake up and get out because it was flooding. We were one of the last campsites on the river before a 200-foot waterfall, Mooney Falls. We couldn't go upstream, but couldn't go down the waterfall either, so we all climbed up on the rock on the canyon wall and waited it out. Throughout the night we could hear other campers clamoring for safety, trees snapping and cracking, and we could feel the rumble of boulders being moved along the ground by the water and debris. When dawn came and the sun began to light everything again, we could see broken trees, destroyed tents, upended picnic benches, etc., all collecting together in a huge wet debris field. The water eventually went back down, leaving all that debris behind. It blocked our way back upstream, so once it was safe, we climbed down the side of the waterfall and were rescued by helicopter several hours later in the afternoon. There were around 200 plus total campers, and as far as I know, no major injuries. But I remember hearing people scream for each other, climbing trees, even using a rope to climb from one tree across the river to another in order to help their friend in the darkness. Totally harrowing. Bummer was my tent had my car keys, cell phone, and wallet inside when it got swept away. Getting home required my mother-in-law to come and bring our spare car keys to us, which was a whole ordeal in itself since she had no idea where to find us. It was more of a bushwalk, but when I was a teenager I lived near a very long creek trail in empty bushland. Beautiful place, very hilly and mountainous area with rainbow lorikeets and a dam nearby. My friend and I headed to the creek after school because I wanted to show her a bat colony near the trail. I don't remember if I turned left when we had to turn right or if we turned right when we had to turn left, but either way we never found the colony. This was before smartphones, so we just followed the creek aimlessly for a couple of hours, hoping it would end up somewhere familiar. It was getting dark when she first saw it, a flash of red in the bushes. We have rosellas out here, but she swore it wasn't a bird. We heard rustling now and then, which made us walk faster. It was hard to move fast on the terrain, because the slope along the creek was getting steeper. Embedded in the creek bed were sometimes these huge, concrete cylinders. Big enough to stand inside in. Some of them had water flowing through them, some didn't. Soon after she saw the red flash, we spotted something else on the other side of the creek. It was one of the big concrete cylinders, but there was stuff inside. I thought it was garbage at first, but it was a home. We could make out blankets, a shopping trolley full of miscellaneous items, and newspaper/magazine cutouts hanging off the concrete walls. Mostly of girls. We didn't say anything to each other, but we were almost running at this point. We heard rustling now and then, which could have been anything. Plenty of wildlife in that area of bushland. It was maybe 30 minutes to an hour later when we saw wire fencing, and followed it to some kind of garbage yard in an industrial area. Turned out we were a 3.5-hour walk from our original starting point. I'm still not 100% what happened that day, other than the fact my friend was grounded for about a month. This scared the absolute shit out of me as a child. Backstory, Adirondack 46er here. Started when I was around 11 years old. I went to this summer camp in upstate NY called Chingachgook. They take you on 3-day hikes into the high peaks, and this year happened to be my first time hiking a high peak without my dad, so I was a bit weary. My dad has hiked literally everywhere I can think of, so I never really worried about my safety when we would go. He absolutely knows what he's doing, and it was usually just the two of us. At this summer camp, they send you out into the Adirondacks in groups of 5 to 7 kids. My group was all preteen girls, led by 2 female counselors, usually between the ages of 17 to 19. For some reason this is regarded as perfectly safe and legal, and it never occurred to any parents or staff that a group of teenage girls should not go off into the wilderness alone for several days with no cell service. Anyways, we had been hiking in the Great Range area, and we found a lean-to, so we started setting up our camp. As we're cooking boxed rice later on in the evening by our campsite, one of the counselors spots a bear cub. So obviously, being an 18-year-old girl, she really panicked hard. The counselors were trained in survival skills and all that, but come on, at the end of the day they're rich teenagers, and literally just runs away, leaving a group of preteens with one 17-year-old counselor in a mother bear's territory. Cub is sniffing around our food, so we run off. We return like an hour later to not only see our whole camp ransacked and all our food for the trip missing, but also 3 bears. 2 cubs and 1 massive angry brown bear. She was super displeased to see us all wander into her campsite and literally charged after us when we promptly ran away. Honestly, thank fucking God the one counselor we had left happened to have bear spray. All she did was spray it in the bear's general direction and she ran directly into it. We didn't see her or the cubs again, but they are all our food, and like I said, the hikes are 3 days and we had no service. So we basically starved for 3 days, and the runaway counselor still made us hike the Great Range, 4+ high peaks, on empty stomachs. Boy, my dad was so pissed when he heard about that story. This happened about a year ago. I started up a hike in a USFS wilderness area, and about a mile in got this feeling that I was being watched. It was that feeling of dread when you know someone or something is watching your every move, but you can't see the pair of eyes. I hurried down the trail, got to my destination, and hurried back, but knew something was off. I'm an experienced hiker but hadn't ever had that feeling before, and have never felt it since. Several weeks later, a woman disappeared while hiking on the trail. Officials later found her body near the trail. They determined that she had been attacked and killed by a cougar, the first ever recorded death by cougar in my state. Officials immediately closed off the area, and began a hunt to kill the cougar, doing so a few days later. In retrospect, I know exactly what was watching me that day, and shudder to think it could have been me. Me, my sister, and one of our cousins went hiking along one of the trails at the campground we were staying at one summer. We were all really young. My cousin is older than us and she wasn't older than 13 to 14. We followed the paved trail for a while, but my cousin got bored and wanted to go off onto one of the dirt paths, and we walked further for like 20 minutes. We could see the confusion and panic on her face when she realized she didn't have any idea where we were, and the dirt path eventually just ended. We were lost for over an hour before we finally found the road that led to the campground and flagged a car down. It was a family who stopped to help, and they told us they would give us a ride back, but my cousin, I guess afraid to get us into any more trouble, said we couldn't accept rides from strangers. I was so relieved to see another person that I didn't care and wanted to get in the car so bad lol, but the woman understood and got out and walked with us all the way back to camp. So thankful for her to this day, though I'm sure we weren't in that much danger. I was so scared that we'd never make it out of those woods. I was backpacking in the Colorado Rockies in 2015 with my scout troop. We forged our way up this narrow little trail to get over a mountain called Hunchback Pass. Little did we know that the fork we had passed miles ago was where Hunchback Pass Trail started, and we were on a trail that would take us back up to the Continental Divide, where we had come from early that morning. We slowly started to realize as time went on that this was not where we should be. Being lost is never a good feeling. A worse feeling is being lost on top of a 12,000-foot mountain as thunderclouds roll in. With metal frame backpacks and aluminum hiking poles. We forged up to almost the very top, which would have laid out plainly for us our grievous error. But as we slogged through the shin-deep snow, early July, BTW, I saw the lead hiker, we'll call him Nick, come running back down as fast as he could without falling. I asked him what was up as he passed me, and he didn't even slow down as he screamed. I could feel my hair standing up. The rest of us quickly noped out of there and followed his retreat. The storm caught us on the way down, drenching us with icy rain and pelting us with hail. I rolled my ankle in my hurry, which did nothing to help either my fear or my discomfort. We finally made it to the meadow we lunched in and made camp for the night. Pretty much all the hiking we had done since lunch had been fruitless. We debated whether to go try the pass again or if we should double back 2.5 days hiking and hike down the train tracks. Durango Silverton train drops us off on day 1, picks us up on day 8, to our rendezvous. We tried the pass again and got the correct route this time. I'm actually going back on the same route in 2 days. This will be my 3rd time since then. Last year I faced the treat of the Colorado fire outbreak. This time the big challenge is avalanche debris. I never let the Weminuche wilderness beat me. When I was 11 years old, I was hiking on a mountain with the summer camp that I now work at on a mountain called Sugarloaf Mountain in central Maryland. I can vividly remember hiking up a kind of steep part of the trail on the east side of the mountain, when all of a sudden we heard what sounded like 15 people screaming and then running down the trail that we were climbing on. A little info, the East Trail was an up-only trail that led to the top of the mountain, and was an up-only trail, meaning you had to get to the top of the mountain in order to get off the mountain unless it was an absolute emergency. A little off-putting considering there was no reason why that had to enforce that rule. Me and my friend were confused as hell on why the group in front of us was running down an up-only trail, along with the group. We even asked why they were running down, and we heard from the commotion was, "We have to go, now." We heard/found out on the bus home that on the top of the mountain, there was a direct view of a severe storm rolling onto the grounds of a coal mine, and then the coal mine exploding when it was struck by lightning and causing the heavily polluted nearby river to catch fire. I was once going on a nice summer hike on the side of a cliff with my sister, and a man with a big German shepherd started to follow us. The man began to walk even faster until he was almost directly behind us. My sister and I walked faster and faster until we started to run. It was about a kilometer until the track ended and got into the car park, so we were running for a while and the man was still following us. Me and my sister were surprised that the man was still chasing after us, considering he looked like a 50 to 60-year-old. We finally got to my sister's car with the man still following us, banging on the car windows. We proceeded to go to the nearest town to find a payphone because obviously back then we didn't have any mobile phones. We finally got to a payphone, called the police, and they went to the site where we nearly got kidnapped. The police called our home phone and told us that they tried to search for the man who did this to us, but they only found him after he hung himself on a tree and his dog underneath him dead with a stabbing wound. Definitely the scariest moment of my life. As I was ready to head down into the Grand Canyon for a very, very mild hike, all hell broke loose and I was almost pushed off the path by people carrying a stretcher. A woman wrapped in an ice pack was rushed up the trail and loaded into an awaiting trauma helicopter, which I had previously thought was just a normal helicopter. The trail was closed after that. We were told she and a friend, ostensibly experienced hikers, had gone for a one-day hike 2 days ago. Gotten lost and done the worst thing ever, they split up. Even worse, one of them took the remaining water. A search had been started for these women the day before. The woman in the ice pack was the one who had taken the water. She was, for as far as I heard, found having almost made it back to the exit of the canyon and was wrapped up and carried out. The other woman was recovered sometime during the night according to the staff at our hotel. For as far as we were told, the icepack lady passed in the hospital a few days later according to the news. The lady without any water was already dead when they found her. Needless to say, I did not do a Grand Canyon hike after that. That shit was scary. I was supposed to be on a 10-day hike in the Russian Altai, Siberia, but apparently no one else signed up, so they decided to lump me in with a horse trek, but I only discovered this en route to the site. I'm afraid of horses, and refused to ride one, so they agreed to let me go on foot if I could keep up. Turned out to be doable, because none of these Russian ladies had any experience with horses, so the pace was quite slow. Conveniently, they strapped all my gear / my share of the food to the horse I wasn't riding, so I just had a small bag to carry. Anyway, it's day 6 or so, and a thunderstorm hits right above us. I wanted GTFO of the spot we're standing, which is vulnerable to lightning strikes and full of horses which are getting spooked by the storm and could trample me, but these ladies are all whining about the rain and want to stop and put their raincoats on. So I say F this and take off. We're en route to a giant lake, so I'm sure I can find it, even without a map, compass, etc. So around half an hour passes and I start thinking it's odd that the horse caravan hasn't overtaken me yet. So I stand in place for a while, but they still don't overtake me. I'd been following hoofprints thinking that other groups headed for the lake must have come this way. I head back to where I think we parted ways, but still no sign of anyone. I wander some more until I find more hoofprints, and start following these. I start hearing water, so I think it must be the river that feeds into the lake, and that I can just follow it. I make it to the river. It's been a couple miles by now, but it's whitewater rapids, about 30 feet to the other bank, with nowhere to cross, and the side I'm on is a sheer cliff, with no apparent parallel path to follow to the lake. This is when it hits me that I'm completely lost, with no food or other supplies, and no way to contact my group. I start heading back the way I'd come from, and about a mile in, I'm really starting to panic. Then finally, a ways later, I run into a couple with a map, and they're able to point me in the right direction. After another 20 minutes or so, and starting to think I hadn't properly followed directions, I hear someone yelling my name. I follow the voice, and it turns out it's the group leader who had gone back to look for me. By then, the storm had cleared, and the first look I got of the lake was really breathtaking. I didn't wander off on my own again the trek. A few friends and I went to the Apostle Islands in northern Wisconsin. We were the only ones camping on that island for the 3 days we were there. It was incredible. It's right on Lake Superior, too, which is crystal clear and gorgeous. So we went for a hike the second day around the island because the trail went all the way around. Except, we didn't bring any water or food on our hike and we kept stopping every half hour or so to swim or smoke. Eventually we got maybe halfway around the island when we realized we were all exhausted and hungry and so thirsty. We still had half our hike left, probably more, so we decided to stray from the path and walk straight across the island to our campsite. Bad idea. Not only was the brush so thick at points you couldn't see the person in front of you, but it was hard to tell if we were going in the right direction, so it took us forever to get through it. I want to say about halfway through our hike back through the center of the island, I was in front, my boyfriend behind me about 20 feet, and then another 10 to 20 feet behind him were our other 3 friends. Suddenly, the 3 in back started running and yelling something at us. As they got closer we heard them yell, "Run! Bees!" So we just took off. Of course, this is where it started to get hilly and steep, so it was not easy. You know that scene in the Hunger Games where Katniss is running from the tracker jackers up and down the hills, jumping over logs, running for her life. I felt just like Katniss in that moment. Jumping over logs, sprinting, barely staying ahead of the bees. I somehow avoided them and didn't get stung once, but everyone else ran right down to freezing Lake Superior and just jumped, soaking 2 phones in the process, one of which worked for another 3 years after. When we finally got a chance to look up the bees that were following us, we found out they're called bald-faced hornets and they would not leave us alone the rest of the trip. I'm pretty sure they could smell the pheromones or something from their stings and marked us as enemies for life when one of us stepped on their giant underground hive. Terrifying, but I still feel badass for outrunning them. Mountain biking, not hiking for me. I was about 2 hours into this really difficult ride, and almost to the end. I come around a corner and there is a gigantic moose about 25 yards up the trail. I stop, and she looks at me. Then a baby moose starts slowly getting to her feet. At this point I am thinking, oh mama, I am not going to mess with you or your baby. I promise. I'll just slowly back away. And as I am backing off, a second baby starts to stand up. So I head back up the trail around the corner and wait for a bit. I think I can't go back, I am beat. I have to finish up the loop. So I wait about half an hour and peek around the corner. I look, and there are no moose on the trail. I debate for a bit longer, but now it is getting late. So I jump on my bike and race through the spot where mama just had her babies. I was afraid she might have moved them just off the trail. Fortunately, there was no mama monster moose that came crashing after me. But that was probably my scariest mountain biking rides I have ever had, and one of the coolest things I have seen while in the woods. This sounds like a joke, and I'm sorry, but at the time it was really freaking me out. I was 16, and went camping with a group of friends, no adults for the first time ever, but all of our parents were like, take Mary's older brother with you to be the responsible adult. Everyone was like, fuck yeah. Because my brother and his girlfriend weren't much older than us and were really cool, he wouldn't buy them alcohol, but he also sorta looked the other way and pretended that he didn't know the canteen was filled with schnapps. His girlfriend had a canteen of wine that she shared with me though, so that was cool. He and his GF had a separate tent a little away from our group. He wanted to be able to hear it if one of those little fuckers tries to spy on us. Which he wouldn't be able to tell if the footsteps were looking into his tent if there were footsteps and giggling constantly right outside it anyway. At least one of my friends did want to spy on them, so it was far enough from us to have some privacy, but within eyesight, and they could still hear my friends Ellen and Josh disturbingly going in it. Now, when Ellen and Josh started up, my god, it was awful, and none of us wanted to be anywhere near that kinky ass freak show, so would go hang out with my bro, and a couple friends followed suit. You ever cram into a tent with 4 other people to awkwardly play cards? So my brother and his girlfriend sorta hung out with my friends some of the time, but also just did their own thing and left us alone. I went on a hike by myself one night and didn't get far because I could just feel something watching me. Later on I tried again, this time bringing Ellen, but I still felt so creeped out. I felt like I was being followed. So the next night, because I really wanted to see the stars and all the pretty nighttime stuff, I begged my brother to go with me. He had some military training, knew how to fight, all that crap, and carried a big fucking knife. So I thought, no one is gonna rape and murder me in the woods with him around, he'll cut off the serial killer's prick and feed it to him. I'm safe. We got pretty far into the woods just fine, and then I started getting scared again. Now, unlike Ellen, my brother felt something watching too. We decided to go back to camp when something ran past the trail behind us. He investigated, found nothing, so we just continued back and slept in shifts, with 2 of us being awake at a time. Now dumbass John decided to play a joke, and went breaking twigs around my brother's tent, before walking towards Lori's tent and scaring the fuck out of her by unzipping her tent really fast and grabbing her foot. She screamed, everyone woke up, and my brother came bursting out of his tent butt naked, wielding an excessively huge knife, dick swinging in the moonlight, and yelling at the sick bastard he thought was there. An image I wished I had not seen but is now forever burned into my brain. This scared the literal piss out of John. Assuming that the whole thing was probably just John screwing with us, me, my bro, his girlfriend, and John went hiking the next day down that same path and found the spot where we heard something move behind us. Nothing there, no footprints. My brother's girlfriend decided to look inside a bush near there and then suddenly cack. And me screaming like a bitch. Yeah, it was a fucking duck that was watching me for 2 days and scaring me. It was just hanging out near that pathway with a plastic beer can connector stuck to its feet. Bro and his girlfriend freed it, and we went on our way. I, of course, was mocked for that scream. Hiked the Washita Trail in sections with my scout troop. One section we dropped my dad's van at the end of the day's hike and piled into the other vehicle to go to the beginning. Hiked 13 miles and came out at the end at like 11 p.m. Got to the road, no van in sight. It's like 30 degrees Fahrenheit outside, just below freezing for you non-Americans. We look at the map and realize we actually parked 3 miles down the road from where the trail lets out. So we start walking down the road, our feet are sore or numb from the cold. The adults try to get a call out, but the cell reception is exceptionally shitty. We take periodic breaks where we take out a tarp and gather around a backpacking stove to rest and warm up. One of the adults get a call through to his wife and even we can hear her freaking out. He tells her to call the adults who stayed at the camp to tell them to pick us up and take us to the van. Side note, one of the kids was a major bully to me and his dad didn't really do anything to stop him. His dad was one of the adults at the camp, along with my dad. We keep walking toward where the van is and we see lights coming toward us on the dirt road. It's the dickhead's dad, and let me tell you, I have never been happier to see him. We pile in his car, I was in the trunk, and get to my dad's van, which is covered in frost, which was a pretty scary sight to us at the time. We get back to camp and my dad is waiting for us with a whole lot of Taco Bell which he went to get while dickhead's dad picked us up. I go to my tent and don't come out until it's time to pack up next morning. We've all called it the death hike ever since. Hiking on a trail in Grand Teton National Park with my brother. We were about 2 miles into a hike that ended up being way longer than we expected, stopped to sit by the lake for a little breather and some water. We found some grizzly bear scat that was maybe 2 days old at the most. We weren't all that worried about it as we already knew that the areas we would be in were known to have a bit of bear activity. However, it did put us a bit on edge knowing that there was definitely a grizzly around in the days prior. We continue on our hike, although while being sure to make some noise to avoid coming as a surprise when we might turn a corner and see some surprises/angry wildlife. We round a corner on the trail and hear some twigs snapping probably 30 yards to our left. We stop, look around, and see nothing. Not 5 seconds pass before we hear what sounds like a massive fucking animal crashing through branches and stomping directly towards us. Both of us reach for our bear spray on our belts and prepare to spray the ever-loving fuck out of whatever's about to come out at us, but nothing does. After my heart returned to its normal place in my chest after having taken its split-second vacation down to the very bottom of my ballsack, we try to figure out what the hell just happened. Turns out, there was no 1,000-pound animal charging us, and the ruckus came from a flock of geese, but believe me say that what happened in that moment would have made even John Coulter shit his pants like I did. I used to hike in woods near my home. I lived way up on a hill and we were surrounded by woodland. Anyway, one night I got stuck in some of the big woods in the fucking dark. It was my fault. I left too late and didn't realize the sun was going to set on me. I had gone way into the woods before I realized I wasn't going to be able to get out in time. It started to get really dark very quickly and I started to panic. Next thing I know it's pitch black and my phone had no signal. I was so fucking scared. I can laugh about it now but it was unreal. I was shitting myself. After walking what I thought was the way back for about half an hour I started to hear things moving in the woods around me. Wildlife, foxes probably. That gave me the heebie-jeebies because I couldn't see anything and I could hear things moving around me. I remember picking up a stick and poking around with it to find trees in front of me. I had my phone light but this was way back in the days of flip phones, so it didn't really do much for me. I managed to get signal and call a friend who set out to find me. Whilst I was talking on the phone some animal ran past my right side and ran into the stick I was holding. It knocked it out of my hand. That gave me a fright, but the worst was yet to come. After hanging up my phone I continued to walk in the dark for a bit, when I heard a male voice somewhere off to my left. I froze. It was dark so if someone was in the woods with me they didn't have any light either. I don't know what it said, it was a few words. Then I thought I could be hearing things and I heard it again and then I heard sticks snapping. So I just hunched down and sat real still for ages. I could hear movement to my left behind me down the hill so I slowly carried on in the opposite direction. I got out in the end. It was one hell of an adventure. My parents chewed me out pretty good when I told them.